good afternoon, folks, and welcome to today's discussion all around building a sustainability plan for your business. And thank you very much for taking the time to join this conversation. And if you're watching it back afterwards, hopefully we'll be tagging in some appropriate resources to the media we share. I'm really pleased we've got two guests joining us from NetSupport today, Sara Wilcock and Lee Jepson. Hopefully you'd like to join the conversation now, both of you. Turn your cameras on. And as if by magic, there they both are. Good to see you both. Thank you very much. Lee, you're looking a little bit pale there. I think the background may not have particularly helped you with your window in the background there. There you go. That's slightly better. I think our attempt to auto-filling a background isn't working too well there. We'll let Lee adjust his lighting settings or force a different background just to address that problem, and he'll come back into the conversation. I always like to allow our guests to introduce themselves to a degree because they know themselves slightly better than I do. So while we're waiting for Lee to adjust his camera, Sara, welcome to the conversation. Good to see you.
Good to see you too, Al. Thank you for having me today.
Not at all. You're CEO of Academy One. Tell us a little bit about you.
Okay, I formed Academy One 12 years ago now. My background is predominantly retail, and I moved very quickly into education. So had a real opportunity to inform the training agenda. So I created Academy One, opened Academy One 12 years ago, and we support businesses looking at every type of training architecture. More recently, we've opened we created the Sustainability Academy to look at how we could help companies to become more sustainable and help people within those companies to make more sustainable decisions. So essentially training and education for the last 30 years, both commercially and government funded opportunities too.
Well, the good news is you've mentioned a number of keywords there that are quite relevant to today's conversation. So you can stay. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Now, Lee, I'm very conscious that if you sneeze or move to the left or right, we may automatically fill you in a sky blue color. So I apologize, but thanks for joining us. Director of IT at Lead Academy Trust. Perhaps you could just share a little bit of a background about Lead and your role.
Yeah, so I head up the IT division of the trust itself, but also head up the IT services function, which is a sold function for schools across the UK. So we've got a team of 60 staff, and one of the biggest challenges we've had over the last few years, going through COVID and coming out of COVID, is around retainment of staff in particular, and how we keep that sustainability around ensuring that we've got the right things for our staff here and the flexibility of working from home and those hybrid models and how we can make them. It's hard to do a hybrid model when you've got on-site engineers, but how do you share that load between the existing staff? So yeah, it's been going on for quite a while, but we think we've got it, but there's always learning, I think, with everything that we've been testing and trying. But hopefully I can share some ideas that we've done.
Thank you, Lee. And I think it's an interesting one because when we talk about sustainability, sometimes the conversation appears in our organizations to try and mitigate an issue that's occurred rather than potentially planning to avoid that in the first place. And increasingly now, as hopefully we're going to share and discuss today, there's a bit more about that forward thinking about how we can plan for sustainability. I'm going to kick off with you, Sara, if I may, with a starter for 10. And I'm also, just for those listening in, if anybody has any questions, feel free to post them in the chat and I will endeavor to come back to them during the conversation. But from your perspective, Sara, what is the need for a business sustainability plan and what should it help companies actually do?
I think, Al, it goes way beyond short-term profit and goals and focuses on long-term value for business. Making sure that we look at all types of sustainability, so risk mitigation, cost reduction. I think having goals is really a key theme, and sometimes where to start can be a real issue within companies because it's it's a very vast area, and in terms of how do you make your business sustainable. What are the key actions and goals that you need to put in place? And as I said, it's not about short-term value, it's about a long-term plan. And there's many elements that are involved in pulling that together and making sure that you align it to a strategy. So I think first and foremost, it's about how do you identify what strategy it is that you're going to use for your sustainability plan? How do you make your business sustainable so that it can work through some of those really tough times within a business, which we've all seen, I think, recently with COVID. Many businesses didn't have that in their plan, and I've had to work around it and through it. And again, I think that's opened up many more opportunities for businesses to kind of work within their risk mitigation, cost reduction. Understand your market is a key thing. Some of those small businesses that we work with have fantastic ideas, and we work with some great entrepreneurs. But it's about how do you, as a whole, look at what else is there in the market? How are we going to survive and sustain the business? Stakeholder engagement is key. Understand who your stakeholders are. As I say, understand market competitiveness and who those people are. Innovation and adaptability, and I think, Lee, there's an awful lot that you can talk about on that subject, and how we evolve as a company. What plans do we have to keep up with innovation, technology? What do our customers want? Understand the customer base. And it all then comes back to, well, how do we align that to a sustainability plan for our business? You will see that lots of companies use lots of different strategies to look at sustainability, but unless you have that overarching framework to start with, then it's very, very difficult to understand what a sustainability action plan is for your business.
Do you think sometimes, Sara, there's a sort of a miscommunication that we talk sustainability and people think it's about more focused around eco footprint and long-term aspirations than it is, in essence, something that overlaps all of the strands of your business growth, your function, your scalability, is kind of interwoven into everything, really?
Absolutely. I think the word sustainability itself, we speak to businesses every day, and people automatically relate the word sustainability to green, to eco, to recycling, to reusing, to net zero, without fully understanding that unless you implement a number of different strategies. So we use the Sustainable Development Goals because they really do articulate to a business or to anybody what does sustainability mean. So it's about making sure that your staff are well cared for, well looked after. It's about health and well-being of communities. It's about looking at your supply chain as a business, understanding where they then get their produce from. Who are they dealing with? Making sure that we're looking at ethics within different companies. And a lot of this today is also driven by the consumer. So it's not just about us having a sustainability plan and ticking a box, so to speak, which I do think still does happen in many companies. Over the last 3 years, particularly since COVID, we've seen a massive increase in how people recruit. What are they looking for within a job, and also what are employers looking for? And there's a huge responsibility and accountability for employers to have that overarching sustainability plan, but be able to articulate it as well throughout the business.
Absolutely. Lee, your produce is young people, which is a fairly important commodity. And within our schools and mats, there are lots of conversations and priorities around sustainability. Sometimes that ends up being a focus around the risk register for our trusts and looking at those key priorities, but it's much wider than that. So what does it look like from your perspective?
The biggest kind of, I suppose, as they put it, as risks, really, in particular. And you're absolutely right what you said earlier about the focus seems to be on carbon reduction all the time, rather than the other elements that we've got as part of the whole organisation. But around training and development of young people in particular, ready and upskilling for jobs of the future, jobs of today. Since COVID, we've found that there are significant, I guess, issues within young people wanting to, having that anxiety to do things that normally we would do as a granted every day, using the phone, answering the door to people when they've got deliveries, all those little things. But what we call it citizens of the future, and how are we going to reinstill that kind of missing part of that learning journey that we had during that COVID time, to try and bring them into their own, give them that kind of confidence back. So the big focus around all that across all of our schools, mostly our secondaries, but even at primary level, how do we bring that up into secondary so they're confident moving into those years, and then also choosing their options. That's been one of our major focuses in school itself, and then outside from a technical point of view as well. It's actually quite a similar scenario where we've got technicians that we want to bring into a group of technicians that they can get that nurture and support, be a part of the school. So not someone that rocks up for half a day a week and goes home, and you don't see them, have that involvement and be a part of it all, and support the development of anything that the school has got as priority. So it doesn't have to just be, laptops, iPads, things like that. There are other developments within school, like how do we invest or implement the solar regeneration in the school into the curriculum, and how do we then show the students that what impact that's making. And IT have a big involvement in that. So how do we deliver that? So there's been quite a bit around there as well. And there's a lot of upskilling involved to deliver that for each school in particular.
It's interesting, but I think even this initial conversation helps kind of broaden the picture from the examples Sara gave. It's part of that vulnerability to a business is supply chain and workforce, and obviously energy and others feed into that. Within education, there are the same considerations from the IT services provision. You've got external providers of resources and energy costs, but you've also got that element of both staff and students in terms of their social, emotional, mental health, and that broader sustainability of the education system, which has all sorts of different pressures, as we know right now. What do you see? I'm interested because we know that we've touched on the pandemic, and one thing the pandemic fundamentally changed for many sectors, perhaps education least, but for many sectors, was the changing working landscape. And like those things, that comes with a double-edged sword, both opportunity and threats. So I'm interested, Sara, from your perspectives of how you've seen that change when we're looking at our sustainability plans from a workforce perspective.
Yeah, it's a really good question, and it's a really interesting dynamic as well that we've seen happen since the pandemic, and continues to happen. So we've seen a change in the way most companies that we work with actually function on a day-to-day basis. So much more remote working, which is entailed upskilling teams as well. So a lot more investment in digital, but a lot more investment, particularly I would say in the last year, for training and education for their teams on how to use and how to work within this new technology, because I think it was quite alien for a lot of companies, particularly a lot of the companies that we've worked with, where it was very much a 9-to-5 office environment. We've moved to a more remote working environment, so we've had to train our teams how to do that. We've also had to look at people's health and mental well-being, because it can be quite lonely working from home. And if you've been used to working in an environment where you've had those chats around the table or having a coffee, that does tend to go missing, and we can forget sometimes to stop when we work on Teams. And when we work on Zoom meetings, we kind of go from one meeting to another. And that can be quite detrimental to you, or very detrimental to your mental health and well-being. So we've almost needed to train people on how to function in that new environment. It's been a very positive change in many places, because it has created the opportunity for people to work more flexibly. So they can adjust their lives around their responsibilities at home. So it opens up a whole new world of work for many people. But as Lee articulated earlier, we've found within the training environment particularly that we've had to really focus on those new recruits since the pandemic, because the art of conversation is quite difficult, because there's been that isolation. So having those customer chats, engaging with customers and with clients has sometimes been very, very overwhelming for people. And this has a knock-on effect for a company in terms of what do they allocate for their training budget, what do they see as a priority, and thinking about long-term sustainability if we don't invest in the resilience and well-being of our teams and our staff, then we won't have a business. So with massive change in many things, with a big focus on employees' health and well-being, which is actually a good thing. Diversity and inclusion, another change that I've seen, not necessarily since the pandemic, but I would say over the past 10 years. But it's progressively becoming more and more important within businesses, and they are investing in training and education to enable their staff to be able to work within those environments, but also how to have that customer conversation where you're being totally inclusive. Many hybrid work models rather, where people will go into the office 2 days a week and work from home 3 days a week. Again, going back to that remote and flexible arrangements. So changes and the shift hugely in how we support our people are very much needed. I would say in terms of environmental sustainability as well, that there's been a shift, and I would say that's probably only in the last year that people have started to really focus on, well, what skills do our team need, or what knowledge base does our team need to help us achieve our targets? And that also works within your environment, Lee, as well, with education and schools. We've been working more with employers to articulate that message to schools. So the community engagement model as well, much more focus on those things.
It's an interesting one, because there has been we've talked about a big shift in terms of, in many sectors, that flexibility of hybrid working, and that creates a huge opportunity, because potentially you can recruit from a much wider pool geographically of candidates for your business, but it creates the balancing pressure on how do you get people trained and feeling part of a team. But I also think there's a sense that some of the things, particularly when you talk about the SDGs, Sara, I think there's also a shift that employees, I should say, are looking to join employers that can signpost their alignment with many of those values. And that is often becoming the catalyst for some of those conversations, not just around DEI, but on a broader base. Is that what you're seeing?
Absolutely, yeah. I think that's one of the things that surprised us. I would say surprised us. It did actually surprise us maybe 3 years ago when we launched a program around SDGs. So we launched a program aligned to each of the SDGs, and many businesses now use that to help to educate their teams so that they can become more sustainable decision makers, but also help that business on that journey of being sustainable and achieving those targets. And one of the things we captured throughout our pilot program, actually, we had 90 candidates from one particular company, which is a utility company, so very sustainable in everything they need to do. But we worked with a number of different disciplines, so every different discipline within the company. And in particular, the focus from that first round of supporting that team with the training was very much how much we value this company, because they've invested in ethical, sustainable policies, and we understand what they are now, and it becomes a much more attractive proposition. So even if those people leave that company, we know that a lot of them we're still in touch with, they move on, they're looking for that within a new employer. So they're actually voting with their feet, if you like, on what that looks like in terms of sustainability, which is a great thing. And conversely, for the employers as well, it's great for them to be able to have that sustainable message, that ethical message, because it does help with talent attraction and retention.
Absolutely. Lee, from a whether it's a MAP or an education sector or broader within your region, where are you seeing sort of natural changes that we're starting to see in the workplace?
It's again, it works. It's around remote working and flexible working in particular seems to be the biggest strand, and it's very difficult in the teaching area at the moment. It's a very difficult thing. You wouldn't want your child to be taught 50% by one teacher in a year and 50% by another. So there's got to be some approach to how that's going to work, and there's a lot. I think there's still a lot more work to do there, especially because the talent pool for teaching staff in particular is really short and really difficult. And a lot of teachers are leaving the profession for many other reasons, not just flexible working, but that's a strand to it. From support staff, we are seeing a bigger shift. You're right, where you've got potentially an example would be you might have a boiler problem at home. So can you work from home so you're not having to take time away, but you can still get the work done? So then there's no gap in the work streams in particular. We're seeing some changes around whether they can work at different hours. So maybe work earlier or work till later and have twilight sessions and things like that. So there's lots of things being trialed, especially around education in schools themselves. And we're trying to be as flexible as possible. It's very difficult with field engineers, but where we have help desk or administrative teams, how can we do that? That you're right, you want to give that flexibility. You also want it to be a part of a team and to be together as well in some way, shape, or form. How do you create those different models? So we've tried like an in-office day where we get those teams together, normally work from home, but let's have a day in the office so you are together. And then also focus around the well-being, because you've got well-being in the office, but you're absolutely right. In isolation, it can be dangerous if it's for a prolonged period of time. And it's very difficult to then reintegrate back in. We've had some staff that have worked from home for a very, very long time. Asking them to come back in has been quite an anxious thing to do because they've not seen people for a very long time. So it's just building, and it's knowing your staffing, I think, knowing that cohort to know what each person may or may not struggle with. That's something we've had to change. And we had to change our working environment as well to have bigger breakout spaces, quieter zones, just to give them that flexibility around that time for themselves or as a small group to kind of deal with any situation that might come out.
I think it's interesting because the natural draw when we talk about recruitment and retention is to focus on the recruitment. How are we going to get people to come and join our organization? But of course, the bigger cost to the organization is not having effective retention, is not accommodating and finding ways that we can keep that experience and skill set within our organization. So often those soft modifications, the flexibility of working practice, the way we think about giving people broader support are probably the more subtle things that have the bigger impact. Let's just move on. There's a few bits here where I don't want to go down a tech pathway too much with you, Lee, but we've got you on the call. So I've got to kind of focus on a few things. A digital shift has been pretty huge. Sara touched on it. One of the levers for many sectors when it came to the pandemic was the change in digital technology and the ability to join the conversation from anywhere, I guess, at a very simplistic level. But of course, that comes with extra considerations, whether it's your business continuity plans, your infrastructure, the technology you choose. So I'm interested in terms of what you've seen in terms of those kind of priority building blocks that organizations now have to be more mindful of.
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. It's something that we touched on today at a financial directors forum where we had a lot of leaders in the room talking about what their spend priorities are for the coming years. And ed tech or tech in particular is a high topic item. It's going to be something that is heavily invested in, and it's only really happened since the pandemic. And we're seeing a big shift around refresh, around making sure that devices are refreshed on a regular basis rather than really waiting until they're just on the last legs and pop. Because it's easier when you're not hybrid working or remote working to just say use another machine in a room, when that flexibility isn't there anymore. So there's a more pragmatic approach to ensuring that kit is of a good age. And we're seeing a big emphasis around training and development, especially around phishing, cybersecurity, what to do, not linking just to, in the office place or in schools, but also at home, being safe at home, making sure that you're not clicking on links, because if you're using that work device, it could have an impact on your work. So there's a lot of training and development, policies and procedures that we are seeing implemented there. And it's nice to see them happening before something happens, because normally we always used to see a knee-jerk reaction to an attack or a phishing attempt. Whereas now we're seeing that proactiveness. We are pretending to send phishing emails to staff to see if they've clicked the link and then say, "Oh, you need some training," or "You've not read it." It's not catching them out in one sense. It's just making sure that they understood and they understand what they've clicked on. And I'm seeing quite a lot of that happening kind of across the marketplace at the moment.
Just linked around that, obviously, we're in education, we're mindful with our students of their digital citizenship, and for our staff and our workforce, cybersecurity, digital skills is absolutely prevalent. For lots of organizations, smaller organizations perhaps have followed over recent years, things like Cyber Essentials. As an organization, NetSupport, we've just completed the final stage of our ISO 27001, which is all about standards and procedures for keeping your data secured. Do you think, in terms of the dispersed workforce, digital data and security has significantly elevated as a risk now?
I would absolutely agree. I think on any trust or anywhere really, if cyber is not on your risk register and not continuously, probably as a medium or high, then I think there's something not right there. At every trust I go and talk to, cyber is the forefront of their mind. And in particular, schools have been targeted quite a lot in the last 2 years. So it's a real big focus across all the trusts and schools and the academy sector in particular. I think putting plans together, looking at Cyber Essentials, even trust looking at 27001 ISO accreditation is something I'm seeing quite often now as a priority moving forward. And a lot of things such as MFA it's just a basic right, I think, is what I'm seeing going through schools. And then the next level really is around looking at that data and what data we're storing and how is it being, especially remote work in particular, how are we moving that data between school and that home device? And are we making sure that it is safe? And is it necessary to transport that data? Is all the questions that are being raised now at kind of an audit and risk level.
And I suppose the other one, which I think transfers across all sectors, it's not unique to education or retail or any particular sector, is that there's a natural focus that when we look at looking at our business growth and our delivery of whatever service we do, that the focus is around the visible, the technology that is used at the user level. And what it has drawn a focus back onto is actually the biggest vulnerability is the hidden stuff, the infrastructure. That bit, like you say, preempt the problem. We update the devices, but do we update the switches and the backbone and the servers and the bits that actually make our systems go? Do you think people are now getting more savvy to that as well, Lee?
Yeah, I think they absolutely are. And I think it was, any technician would say to me that, oh, it's very difficult to explain to somebody, especially finance director, for example, that I need to replace a server when it's 7 years old, but it still works. So what's the point of changing it? It's absolutely fine. But actually, there's the bigger issue here. It's not just the fact that the hardware is at risk, the software could be at risk, the old version of operating system. I think there's a lot of emphasis on that. And I think the media has helped that as well. Also, what's happened, so anyone that's been attacked, we're not seeing just education, as you rightly put. We are seeing large organizations losing data or getting compromised, and that is really putting it into everyone's forefront. And you're forever hearing people saying my Facebook's hacked, things like that. And it's the understanding part of it and what to do in those scenarios that is the priority. And creating incident response plans, which is what I've seen being used quite a lot now, is what it's possibly going to happen in all of our time working in IT or education or a business. But what do we do when it happens, and how do we manage it, and how do we recover from it, and what have we learned from it? Is all part of that kind of end result, and part of those incident toolkits.
Yeah, without going into it's not really techie, but I'm interested from your perspective, Sara. When organizations are looking at the broader, where do we invest as part of our sustainability plan? It feels to me, with the changing technology, whether we're talking about cloud-based technologies or AI and how we can use it, that there's as much a conversation about the driver for this is about business productivity as there is about security. Are you seeing that people recognize that there's a win-win potentially when we're talking about their technology in their organizations?
Yeah, I think again it depends on the level of understanding, and just going back to Lee's point, when you speak to depends who you speak to within the organisation as well. Having those conversations with the financial directors of companies, even kind of going back to just sustainability in general, it's all down to cost. So, there's got to be a compelling business case. So absolutely everything Lee's just articulated. The fact that we need to understand and research what we need, but also be aware of the risks that are involved, how we mitigate those risks. I think if you've got that solid plan and you understand completely what it is that's going to make your business more effective, then yeah, it does impact positively on profitability. But all of that I've just said has got to be in a business case that a financial director can understand.
Yes, and that often is the challenge, because certainly on the technology side, sometimes where we can see significant risk, that isn't necessarily quantifiable for someone where that's not their discipline. I think what all these paths kind of point to is that, there's two halves to this. One half is, if we don't do it, this is the risk to our organization and our long-term survival. And at the same time, there's also that, and if we could do this, there's an opportunity for greater efficiency, productivity, support of our staff and their efficiency. And it's about, actually, rather than talking about these things as individual items, is bringing them together into that kind of cohesive plan that you referenced, Sara.
Yeah, again, really good point. Just whilst you were talking then, it's making sure that you're taking the whole team on board and we don't work in silos within an organisation. Because I have seen in very recent years, companies spend literally millions on new technology because an organisation thinks that's what they need to future-proof their business, but it's not been properly researched. And it ends up being a complete waste of money and you have to start again. And I've seen that in several different companies, large organizations that have spent multi-millions. So if we kind of scale that down to smaller businesses who, we need to support as well to help the economy grow. It's very difficult, I find, to understand. It can almost be a black hole. We do need that education to understand what it is. What is the technology? Why do we need it? How is this going to future-proof our business? And make sure that we've completely researched whatever it is that we're investing in.
I guess that's a perfect example of why it will always work out cheaper to pick up the phone and speak to a Sara than it will be to just have a go yourself and realize you've gone down the wrong path. I mean, Lee, you must, in education, we can all have an anecdotal chuckle over all sorts of projects that have been done on a short-term view rather than a long-term view, where it's not been the right trajectory. And lots of the conversation, thankfully, in education has been about having a digital strategy as part of that broader picture of where we're going and looking to connect the dots longer ahead. How are you seeing that shaping up with all the different schools and trusts that you support?
It's becoming more effective, I think, in planning ahead with what technologies we're going to refresh, what we're going to introduce. And I think from a financial director's point of view, it's also helping them plan ahead from a budgetary point of view, because we can get a better idea, a 3 or 5. I always like to do a 5-year plan. You can always say years 4 and 5 will change, but it gives you a really good trajectory of how much money we will need across that period of time. And it's really going to help then give the flexibility back to the school of what would they like to know and what would they like to have, and gives the technical team a foresight of where we're going and what direction we're going and when we're going to have these things refreshed. So it stops those anecdotal conversations. Oh, my laptop's 6 years old now, it's replacing. Well, actually, as part of a trust plan, we've replaced all your device every 5 years. So that's all set in stone, and roughly when you're going to get those devices replaced, and it just makes things a bit more clearer. And then it also then contributes to the ideas of what we're going to use in the classroom and how we're going to use them, and gives that freedom to the school, especially in trust, because the hardest part I find in trust is that you don't really want to dictate what happens in the lessons in the classroom. You want to give that foundation of infrastructure and then give them the freedom of what they'd like to use on top of it. And I think that's what I'm seeing more often across all of the trusts.
Perfect. And I can see, Sara, we've got you under a spotlight now to get those questions out of you. Bless you. The sun's obviously come out and shining for you. On a bigger picture, we've kind of talked about you know, part of our sustainability is thinking about the future growth of our business. We've thought about the fact that staff are a key thing. We've got to nurture and protect staff. We've got to think about risk mitigation. Technology is one of the enablers. If we come back to that original kind of thinking about the SDGs and the broader picture of our sustainability plan, then there is opportunities both from an in some cases financial, but more often than not, it's about a social good and an aspiration for our businesses to be you know, a good contributor to society and the business community, to think about some of the environmental factors where we can take proactive choices in our organizations. So I'm interested, perhaps to start with you, Sara, you know, what are some of the steps that organizations could or should be thinking about when it comes to, you know, just stepping stones into thinking about how they can be a, you know, a smaller contributor to the footprint, shall we say?
Yeah, first of all, I would say don't get overwhelmed, because we speak to many businesses and many organisations, charities as well, that ask us, well, where do we start? I mean, it's a very overwhelming subject, and I think people can become very anxious about thinking about some of the things that are currently happening in the world, and seeing those news reports of icebergs melting and kind of, well, what can we do about that? So it's about breaking it down and bringing it back into those small steps, which is exactly why we use the SDG framework, because it is the only global consistent framework that 193 countries or member states have signed up to. And it does articulate everything that we need to do very, very easily to have those small steps. And the biggest thing, I think, as an organisation that we can do is make sure we take our team on that journey with us. So don't sit around a board table and agree what your sustainability plan is going to be. Make sure that that vision and those objectives are shared with your team, and educate your team on what they can do within an organisation and as global citizens to make small steps to have a big impact.
There's a challenge here, isn't there, depending on the scale of your organization. Wearing a different one of my hats, support working with our combined authority in our region, one of the challenges is for smaller businesses, the will or the appetite may be there, but the net cost, whether it's to change energy provision, insulation, changing of vehicles, there's all a significant cost, which can feel, particularly after the last couple of years, really inaccessible. So would you argue there's also, once you've got that sense of what could we do, it's also about reaching out to the right people who can give advice, where you can get support and grants and other activities to help accelerate that?
Yeah, absolutely. And it's knowing where to go to find that information to get to a community, particularly if we're talking about small businesses. You know, there's lots of help for large businesses as well, but they tend to have teams that are able to find that information out for them. And just talking about large businesses, I think one of the things that we work with large businesses is making sure that sustainability doesn't just sit within a sustainability team, that they work across the organisation and share those goals. For smaller businesses, it's about knowing where to find them. So find information. Chambers are very good at doing that. I think it's signposting people to the right place where they can, within their own location, where they can find information, share good practice as well. So very much what we're doing today, you know, have those community boards. You don't need to spend thousands of pounds to find out or to write a plan. It just talk to people within your own community. Someone will have had the same issue and they will be able to help.
I know from your experience, you've worked with some tiny little organisations like Thames Water and Heathrow Airport and plenty of others. But do you find the starting conversation is the same, irrespective of scale? Actually identifying and understanding what the areas are that you can start to put into your plan?
Yeah, very much so. I think everybody has the same targets. Understanding what they are is the piece of work that we try and help people to do. So where we talk about local authorities, where they might have a net zero plan, you know, what is net zero? That's, you know, that's the end result. It's not, it doesn't tell you how to get there. So sharing information on what we can do and how we can all move in the right direction. I think raising awareness of what people can do without it costing them thousands, because we can't all change all of the light bulbs all at once. You know, it's a very easy thing to do, but it's a very costly thing to do as well for some businesses. It's about those smaller steps. And the SDGs, again, are perfect. They're perfectly linked to everything we do, because we talk about no poverty, zero hunger, everything's interconnected. And doesn't matter what size business you are. We also work with many SMEs and smaller companies, and we help them in exactly the same way. But we will always look for funding for them as well. And I think that's one thing that can be articulated in those community forums. How do we fund this?
I think that's a really important message, Sara, because I think often the natural thing is, yeah, we'd like to do something, but right now we can't afford it, without recognizing that actually it's just about forward planning the choices you might make moving forwards between A and B, and some might be more so. Lee, linking to that kind of topic, there's lots of work when it comes to educating young people around SDGs and what we can do. But within the confines of educational budgets and organization like yourself supporting many, how much can you do, or how does that weave into some of the decision making you're seeing schools or your own organization making?
I think what we're seeing in schools is looking at, as we touched on earlier, about priorities, even the small ones that are going to make that reasonable but larger scale impact that can also be fed into the education side of it as well. So some of the basic things like turning off lights, or all those kind of energy saving efficiency models. Printing in particular is such a really big area in school, and we saw a big like a reduction over COVID in printing, and now we've seen a huge spike, bigger than we've ever seen in printing across schools, even though we might have more devices now, and we're trying to figure out why that is. What can we do to make those changes? How do we make a reduction in printing across all of our trust schools? Even some of the smaller things at school level, where we're looking at EV chargers and schemes for staff, salary sacrifice schemes that will not only help with carbon reduction, but also retention of staff, because it's a scheme that normally you wouldn't kind of get that at a trust or a school level. Or we're trying to really think out the box, but it's not going to have any major impact on the budget. In fact, in some cases, a positive impact on a budget. And then measure those and then go back to kind of the trust board for approvals. So there are a lot of different elements being thought about that are not very, like you said, not very expensive at all, and just being signposted to the right people to get that support, because there are grants for schools in some places for the lights, for boilers, etc. And I think it's knowing where to go and who to go to, and then also what funding options are in place to support that.
I think that's really helpful, because I think one of the things is that there are so many different strands of conversations and decisions being taken at operational level to run an organization, irrespective of sector, that almost for me the litmus test is just at the end of any request to make a decision is asking that question: does this link to our sustainability plan? Is there anything in this decision I'm making where there's another option that could have a more positive impact? And it may well be the answer is no on lots of things, but there are others where, yes, it's the simple things like, are we switching to a different energy provider? Are we looking at more insulated products? Are we looking, when we change our vehicles, to a different model? Down to, in industry, it can be down to how much of what we've got is reusable rather than, throwaway and disposable. And just thinking about that, printing is obviously a really good one that I think every organization can say, hang on a second. I'm sort of coming to the end of our conversation here, and as I've said, we will share kind of links and resources that are appropriate to that, including, clearly we need to make sure there's a link there to the SDGs for anybody who's not familiar with those from the UN. I wonder if we could leave listeners with a top tip or two from you. Maybe that top tip is where to get started, or maybe that top tip is just something to be mindful of when thinking about sustainability in the bigger picture. Sara, I'm sure you get people asking you for 100 top tips as part of their engagement with you, but what would you say for anybody who's thinking, you know what, we really need to take this back to the table and start discussing it internally? What would be your recommended starters?
Again, I'd just like to reiterate not to get overwhelmed with the subject, because I think we can go off on a wrong tangent. Make sure you have a framework that you're working to. Decide what your framework is, and everything else will slot into place. If you've got that framework and you've got your overarching goals within your business plan, then that's a great starting point.
Perfect. Thanks, Sara. Lee, anything from your experiences?
I think linking any elements of this into your technology plan, looking at where you want to go from an innovation point of view, and looking at it as part of your cyber plan as well, and make sure that's all part of it. It would help cost things out, and it will link to your sustainability plan, because all elements of IT link into this, so there'll be savings to be made across both elements.
That's a really useful one. And I always think when I talk to schools and MATs and organizations about their digital strategy, there's a natural persuasion to break it into different pillars or different strands. And maybe we need to make sure that sustainability has its own strand and is always visible as part of that conversation point. Folks, thank you so much. I did say if there are any questions, I would feed them in. There are no questions at the moment. I'm sure many will be listening to this over the coming weeks and months, and we'll make sure we share contact details with your good selves. So thank you for joining us for the conversation today. It's really appreciated, and look forward to seeing listeners again on another episode. Thank you.
Thank you, Al. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Al. Thank you.